what is up, everyone? Happy weekend. I am so excited for this one. I'm going full nerd because I've had this episode in the back of my mind basically since I've started this podcast. I love this concept. I love this topic. It's honestly all that I really focused on and studied for the last 2 years of my degree, I think. And it's also, I love it because it's one of those things that we just do not realize until someone brings it up to your attention. And so it's not something that just the average normal human being ever thinks about. It is all about languages. I'm talking words, writing, how we use words, how we weaponize words, everything. Everything about languages. And this topic is honestly the biggest reason also why I went into the field of English and teaching. And it's so funny because anytime I tell people that I'm an English major, I always get the same response. And they're always like, oh, so you read a lot of books? Oh, you write papers? And I'm like, okay, well, one, you're not wrong per se, but it's just so much more than that, right? I mean, it's teaching people how to actually read closely and think critically and analyze different logical and reasoning patterns. It's how we inherently raise societies in a culture because this is what really gets me hyped up. So how we teach a language, we are teaching kids. We're not just teaching them how to read a book and how to write a paper. It's what do you value? What are we instilling as morals and ethics, and then what are we enforcing into these kids? It definitively shapes a society. And I'm also so stoked to do this episode too, because it's kind of like 4,000% the reason why I want to study comparative literature for my PhD program. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's taking two societies or cultures or communities and then just comparing and contrasting their literature, which again, it's not just, oh, these people write sad stories and these people write fables. It's deeper than that. It's what inherent values and morals is their educational system instilling into their kids? What authors or books are they having them read as core curriculum? And why are they choosing those? I mean, everything else, right? Okay, so anyway, here we go. This one might be a little bit longer than 15 minutes, but we will see. So, languages. Short answer, we make languages and our educational system racist on a systemic level. The school to prison pipeline for African American kids could seriously be a whole series of episodes on its own. I mean, that's a whole thing to unpack and talk about. So I'm not going to dip into that today, but I mean, just think back to your own childhood days. I know that's terrifying and traumatic and no one wants to do that, but just, bear with me here. So think back. A middle schooler walks in late. No reasoning, no late slip. Their hood's up, headphones in. They don't take the headphones out. Right? If that kid is white, it's, oh, what a poor kid. They're struggling. They need more support because their parents are getting a divorce, or they're having a tough time, or, being a teenager is just so hard, or maybe they got dumped, or, oh, maybe their mom just sucks again and dropped them off late. Whatever excuse comes up, right? But if that kid is black, now it's a whole different vibe and perspective, isn't it? Now it's a troublesome youth, and they're probably a bad egg, and they're hanging out with the wrong crowd, and they just don't care, and they aren't a good kid, and they're problematic, and they have behavioral issues. There are no excuses made. That kid gets sent to the principal's office because they're late for no reason. It's a whole, like I said, this is a whole thing in itself, right? But let's look at these kids in an English class. So when they're writing essays, obviously they have to do well. And unfortunately, this is my biggest gripe with English teachers, but we all have a different writer's voice. It's just, that is what it is. We can copy other people, which is what we're trained to do, which I'll go into in a second, but we all have our own writing voice. And in order to succeed in school, you have to mimic your teacher's writing. Unfortunately. I mean, I have done it. I know exactly how this game is played. You find your teacher's writing style, you find what they like, you find their little words or their little phrases, or maybe they hate opening prepositional phrases. Whatever it is. They have their little nuances. You find out what those are, and then you just know, if you want to do well, you just don't do any of those things, or you do the things that they do like in order to get a good grade. The system is messed up. It is absolutely messed up, right? But we're going into that. So in this English class, right, the kids, in order to succeed and to graduate high school, you have to find those little nuances for your English teacher and then follow that pattern. But think about all of the kids that aren't white, right? If they use any dialect, not even just in high school or middle school, but if you look at authors too, upcoming authors, if any author or writer uses a dialect, like Ebonics, for example, because that's the easiest one that always comes up in classrooms and arguments like this, what do we think of them? We immediately think they're unprofessional, they're uneducated, they're ghetto, they're dumb, etc., etc. And why? Like, seriously, why? Why do we think that? Because of a dialect that just isn't English. It's because we were ingrained from a very young age that there is one correct, capitalized, standard American English. And that's just what we need to adhere to in order to sound educated, professional, well off, whatever the case may be. And so anything that deviates from this quote unquote standard American English, which is fucking silly if you even think about it, because even in relatively geographically how small the United States is, look at all of the different dialects we have. We've got crazy people out there saying bubblers instead of water fountains. And that's just fine. But then why is that not fine for them to use in their school essays? Why do we demonize and ostracize other dialects just because they're different from ours? It's bonkers, absolutely bonkers. And then look at this image that we are presenting, that we are enforcing of SAE, or Standard American English. Old white males. Our whole educational system is founded on making everyone from any cultural background sound like a white male. In order to succeed in many realms, job interviews, emails, essays, colleges, publications, whatever, we're trained to reshape our identity, essentially, and our voice into that of a white male in Standard American English. Because that's what our teachers enforced as kids. We said, oh, you want to sound educated? Use a semicolon. You want to sound educated? Steal these phrasing patterns and structures from Charles Dickens. And again, I know this is asking a lot, but like, look back into your childhood days. When did you ever read books in your school by someone other than the Brontes, Dickens, Fitzgerald, Austen, Shakespeare, Melville, Milton? I mean, the list is endless. Look at the pattern. White. Predominantly male. Sometimes you get some females, but all of those texts are saying, oh, but like my life goal is to get married and, be enough and adequate for a old white male that's running the system. And I mean, look around the school you went to. When did you ever see posters of kids that weren't white? And I'm not talking about like the don't use drugs posters, because that doesn't count. Depending on where you lived, when did you ever see diverse teachers or faculty or administration? Is the big one too. All of these underlying little things are sending a message to the kids. And this is directly telling the kids what we as a society value and appreciate and reward with higher positions of power and authority. It's just bonkers. It's bonkers. Like I said, I love, okay, well, maybe that's bad phrasing. I don't love this topic because obviously it's a bad thing. But I find the concept. I'm very invested and very, very, very interested, but mostly invested in fixing this problem. But it's interesting to me, and I think it's fascinating, the fact that all of these issues stem from basically an English teacher. And that kind of goes back to the very beginning when people are like, why do you want to be an English teacher? That's why, because I'm trying to fix the system, you know? I want my kids to not grow up in this system. And it really does all start from our teachers, and especially our English teachers, because it's fascinating. But like I said, words matter. The way that we teach English matters in many ways. But the other piece of language, again, that I think is fucking fascinating, but that I also want to touch on, are names, actually. So names are like a very intricate, complicated part of your identity, right? And it's bizarre how it works because no mom ever in the history of ever gives birth to a kid and then says, I want to raise a little prick, a little asshole. So welcome to the world, Chad. Or, oh, I want to raise like a downright bitch. Hi, Karen. No one does that. But names really do form a piece of our identity, and they create a story, if you will, of our experiences, our cultures, everything else of what makes us who we are, which is usually fine, but can also be wildly problematic, which I'm sure it's not too far of a stretch for you guys to see where I'm going here. So the story, it like blows my mind that this is actually a real story. So when I was doing my California teaching credential program, it's a program that teaches you how to be a teacher, right? And so it was all focused a lot on, like I said, how we teach English and how a lot of the system is inherently racist and just systemically racist. And so they're teaching us not to do this, right? They're teaching us ways and strategies to not be racist. Like, throwback, shout out to my old episode, How to Be Anti-Racist. This is what they're teaching us, yeah? And so I had 1 week's like discussion post assignment thing, and I can't even remember the prompt. I really can't. It was something basically around that. And obviously my last name is Kim, because I got married and changed my name. And this is honestly not the first encounter that I've had where people are like, ooh, they just like assume what my ethnicity is. And they're like, oh, are you Korean? And I'm like, no, I'm white as fuck. Like, how, what? Hello? No, I'm not Korean, you know? I wish, but no. Or it's funny too, they'll be like, oh, you have a last name Kim. Do you speak Korean? And I'm like, that's a stretch right there, you know? But anyway, I write my post. It's got my name written all over it. Last name Kim, you know? And so, and then, this is where it gets interesting. Some Chad asshole comments on my post and dove into a whole discussion, one-sided discussion, about how I should have written about the adversity I'd experienced as an Asian female in our educational system, and how it must have been so hard for me to grow up in this environment and all this shit, right? And I did. I called his ass out. I replied and I was like, sir, I am white. I even have a profile picture right next to my name, right next to this post, where I'm clearly white. You're doing exactly what we're studying not to do. You are reading a name. You are then assuming a life story and background experience and certain knowledge base and everything else about my identity, and then restructuring your message to me based on that. You didn't even talk about any of the shit that I said. Like, you didn't even respond with the usual bullshit discussion response saying, that's a really good point. I like how you brought that up. Rephrase my last 2 sentences and then try and add your own touch onto it to hit that 250 word count that it usually is. Nope. This Chad just went off on a tangent about me being an Asian female. And I'm like, dude, what the hell? What is this? And I'm like, you are the reason why hiring committees have to remove candidate names to avoid unconscious bias and judgment. Like, you are the reason. 100%. It's wild to me. But I know I brought up before how people would assume that I spoke Korean when they saw that I had a Korean last name. And so that piece of the systemically racist part of our society is just so heartbreaking to me. And like I said, I'd never thought of it before because it just never occurred to me. But then once I knew about it, I just saw it everywhere. And it's so sad. So we do this super terrible thing where we link cultural authenticity with a language. Meaning, like, if you're Hispanic but you don't speak Spanish, you're somehow lesser than. You're less authentically Hispanic. You're not a real Hispanic. And that's just so disheartening and demoralizing. And so Daniel doesn't read or write Korean, and he gets bullied all the time for it. Again, it's just jokes. Bullshit. He gets bullied for it. And I've been trying to learn Korean because, one, my goal is to have a conversation with his grandma one day. And two, I think it's fascinating languages, especially the languages that have different alphabets than ours. They're like fun little puzzles for me. I think it's super interesting. Three, I want my kids to know Korean, which means one of us has to teach them how to speak Korean and read and write Korean. And then also 4, I need to be proficient in another language in order to actually apply and get accepted into a comparative literature PhD program. But anyway, for all of those multitude of reasons, I started, obviously, when I was learning the language, I started first with the alphabet so I could read and write. So I could like pick out the symbols and sound them out, whatever. But Daniel can't do that. His comprehension is excellent. Like, he can watch and understand K-dramas without subtitles. He can listen to his family's conversations and know what they're saying. But it's been so long. When he speaks Korean, it's kind of spotty. You know, like grammatical things, you know, are a little rusty, and then he can't read or write. But it's so sad because people all the time, and even sometimes Daniel himself, they'll like joke about that, and they'll be like, oh, well, Maggie can read Korean, she's more Korean than you are. And it just breaks my heart every time I hear that, because like, it's not his fault. You know, his parents didn't teach him how to read or write Korean like many other parents, because they didn't want him to grow up. They wanted him to grow up fluent in English. They didn't want him to have any more struggles than they already would in the educational system. A lot of parents don't teach their kids their native language first because they don't want them to have an accent, and because they don't want them to be bullied in school or have a hard time, which, like I said, equates to they didn't want them to have a harder time morphing into an old white male writer's voice in standard American English. But it's just so sad to me because language is a huge piece of someone's cultural history. And so that piece of their identity was kind of taken away from them. But, I mean, for good reason, I will say. Or not necessarily good reason, but it's understandable. And in the end, unfortunately, it probably maybe was for the best for them, unfortunately. Because we do bully kids with accents. We do basically punish kids for not sounding like standard American English. By punish, I mean they fail their essay. They have to write their essay again. They fail English. They maybe get held back, whatever depending on how far it gets. But we do basically punish them for that, for not sounding like standard American English. And it's just so sad. And I can't imagine if someone was like, hey, for no reason of your own, you're not a true... insert ethnicity here, right? You're not a real Korean. You're not a true Korean, whatever the case may be. It's so demoralizing. And that goes the same for the intracultural bullying, depending on if you're born in the home country or not. It might, like, don't even get me started on that piece, because that's a whole nother episode in itself. But It's a mess. It's all a mess. It's an absolute fucking mess. I am way over time. Sorry guys. I told you this one would really get me heated, you know? I'm just so invested in this shit. I love this shit. Thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me. I'm really happy that I have this outlet and you guys actually listen. And it's awesome. I have the best friends, best supportive friends. Yeah. Okay. I'm done. Very sorry for being so long. Yeah, dude, make good choices. Be decent human beings. Catch y'all next week. Okay, bye.